In 2007, with a Nobel Prize under his belt for his contribution to peace in his own land, Desmond Tutu embarked on a new career as a world statesman.
The elders can become a fiercely independent and robust force for good.
The dream child of businessman Richard Branson and musician Peter Gabriel, and under the auspices of Nelson Mandela, the elders were formed with the idea that former world leaders could bring their stature and their wisdom to bear in the cause of world peace.
One of the reasons why they involved Nelson Mandela was that there are very few people who would say nay to him. If he invites you, you'd have to have a very, very good reason not to accede to his request.
When the elders recently held a meeting in London, I took the opportunity to continue my conversation with Desmond, who brought along another elder, President Jimmy Carter.
Sir Richard Branson invited us to come down to his island in the Caribbean, and Archbishop and I went along with about 30 or 40 other people to talk about the early plans or possibilities for the elders. We disagreed with a lot of it. Over a period of time, Richard and Peter changed their plans, and then they were formed fairly certainly about 6 or 7 years ago, and then they went to Nelson Mandela, who really has been the godfather of the elders, and so he introduced us, and we began our work together 5 years ago.
What's the most important quality an elder should have?
We should be old. No, I think, one of the most important is independence, that you should be able to speak out fearlessly and not be able to succumb to pressure. And that is one of the reasons why it has to be people who are no longer in office and are not aspiring to hold office, and a modicum of wisdom, or pretend. No pretend, because it is people who have a remarkable range of experience, and I think that you also have a reputation for integrity.
Over the past 5 years, the elders have covered a lot of ground. From East Jerusalem.
I don't think anyone would ever claim that the demolition of someone's home or the confiscation of a home in which the family has lived for many generations is fair or justice or peaceful. So we congratulate you on this peaceful demonstration and hope you will soon be successful.
To the Korean Peninsula.
See you again.
To Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast.
Yes.
To Sudan.
We hope that we can do something that will make a significant difference, that will bring peace to this land.
And to Zimbabwe. Well, not quite.
They've been barred entry by Robert Mugabe's regime.
What are the places where you can see now that you've made a difference?
Well, we basically fill vacuums in the world. We think that if the United Nations Security Council is adequately addressing an issue, or if the United States or Great Britain or the European community is dealing with an issue effectively, we don't get involved. But where there is a need that can be filled by us uniquely, that's when we decide to take on an issue. For instance, going to North Korea is not a common thing to do. And when we go to the Middle East, we meet with the Israelis, we meet with the Jordanians, we meet with Fatah, we meet with Hamas leaders, we go to Gaza, we go to Syria, we go to Egypt, and then we put together our recommendations and make them public. So these are the kind of things that the elders do.
We would hope, that our interventions would be strategic interventions. We don't have limitless resources, but we want to be able to have used them strategically where they make, as it were, the most impact. We have, at some point in our evolution, said we need to be extremely careful that we don't think we have to comment on every single situation. Let's want to spread ourselves too thin. We are aware of that. My own concern has been that I thought we were probably punching below our weight. Because I think, I mean, if you've got a group that has a Jimmy Carter, a Kofi Annan, Mary Robinson, and they make an utterance, one would have expected that the world would probably sit up and take notice.
When the elders visited Jerusalem in 2009, some of them were horrified by what they witnessed. More than 3 years later, those opinions have become the consensus in their group.
I would say at the beginning, only 3 or 4 of us elders were deeply concerned about the rights of the Palestinians and therefore bringing peace to Israel. But as we discussed it for 2 or 3 years, eventually I would say we reached complete consensus and unanimity in pointing out the fact that there ought to be a cessation of Israeli confiscation of Palestinian territory and a resumption of the 1967 borders with small modifications as a basis for peace. And this is the official position of the United Nations and the United States and the European Union, but they don't pursue it. So we thought that we would get involved and try to revivify the concept of peace and human rights in the Holy Land.
And why is it, in fact, that Israel seems to have recently escaped a lot of criticism, not because they've done any reform, but because people have not spoken up?
Well, it's because the United States is involved in a political campaign year, and the supporters of Israel, some of the supporters in Israel, are very critical of any politician who criticizes anything that the government of Israel does. And so the United States has backed away from their active involvement. And as you know, in the last 50 years, the United States has been the primary interlocutor or mediator or conciliator in between the Israelis and their adversaries, the Palestinians and others. And now the United States is not playing any active role. So that's one reason the elders decided, since there is a complete vacuum there, with the European leaders not inclined to become involved, that we would become involved and at least keep the issue of peace and human rights alive as it relates to the Holy Land.
But is there any way that the elders can do something about a vital issue like the settlements, for instance?
Having spoken out in what I believe is the case, I will put on my tin hat and get into the trenches. But I'm not going to be stopped by people who claim, I mean, that I am something that I know I'm not.
And at the same time, I mean, very much so, you said that what you saw in Israel, something that was quite akin to the situation in South Africa before freedom came to the black people of South Africa.
Well, in many instances, worse. It's actually quite distressing. For one thing, we didn't have a wall that encroached so very seriously on the territory of other people. I mean, many of them told us that I used to get to my farm in 10, 20 minutes. Now it's 2-3 hours. And having homes demolished, the Israeli politicians are aware that they can get away with almost anything because the West is guilty. It feels guilty. It feels guilty about what they didn't do when the Holocaust happened. And they've given a kind of carte blanche. Now, if they are penitent, they ought to be the ones who pay the price of that penitence. But the price is being paid by the Palestinians. Part of my own concern for what is happening there is in fact not what is happening to the Palestinians, but it is what the Israelis are doing to themselves. I mean, when you go to those checkpoints and you see these young soldiers behaving abominably badly, they are not aware that when you carry out dehumanizing policies, whether you like it or not, quite inexorably, those policies dehumanize the perpetrator.
That was the sort of reaction in part that you had to your visits.
It was. Well, I've been going there for 30 or more years. And when we negotiated the Camp David Accords, we had two parts. One was peace between Israel and Egypt. The other one was Israel's commitment to guarantee human rights for the Palestinians. They have honored the treaty, but not the human rights for Palestinians. But to answer your question specifically, when we go to East Jerusalem, we visit with families living in the middle of the street who have been excluded from their own home that they've occupied for 65 years and now have no place to go because Israeli settlers want to move into their homes. We've been to the little village of Belin in the West Bank where the Israelis were taking over the entire territory of the farmers, all of their productive land for raising sheep and goats or for growing crops. And we've been to families that have just had their homes completely destroyed by Israeli bulldozers because they refuse to move. So when we go and see these things happen, it makes believers out of people who want to see human rights and justice prevail.